Okay. Hi, everyone. Come on in. Come on in. The water's fine. Happy to have you here this week. And thank you for joining us again for the book study, the Being Myself book study. And our co-host this week is a good friend, Jiffy Reed. Welcome, Jiffy, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Bill. Thanks for inviting me.
I'm happy to have you. I met Jiffy years ago at a Garrison retreat for Rupert, and just happy that many of you that come in as co-hosts have met each other or some of us at the retreats. And thank you for participating as you do. Jiffy is she's recently gotten her master's degree in psychology, and she's when I met her, she was complimenting her Course in Miracles experiences and adding to that Rupert's teaching and pointing the same as, I mean, that's what drew me to Rupert is his teaching seemed like a great next step. And then Jiffy, of course, I mean, as a psychologist, now she's got another piece to the puzzle. She's an amazing individual that I'm grateful that would be here with us. And before we get into this content, I just want to mention that we're going to have a space between the end of this book. We have 2 more chapters, and the beginning of the next book of Rupert's, that is, You Are the Happiness That You Seek. It's not going to come out for a little bit later. It's been delayed some. And I've decided to do a 6-week book study on one of these 3 books, either this one of John Klein or this one of Robert Adams, Silence of the Heart, or this one. This one would just be fun, The Greatest Secret, and this one would be the hardest because it has multiple quotes from many teachers. So anyone that would like to vote on one of those 3 books, just send me an email, billfreeonline@gmail.com, and we'll just do that for about 6 weeks while we're waiting for the next book of Rupert's to come out. And thank you all for being here. And let's get started with Being Myself. We have 3 chapters left in this book. And this week is chapter 11, Establishment in Our True Nature. And Jiffy, you've done this a couple of times. I just would invite you to tell us what you are most interested in this chapter, or the first page of this chapter, which is page 97.
You know what I really love about this chapter is I know that when I first started to do the whole spiritual journey thing and what is this thing called enlightenment, and I had this idea that enlightenment was a state that you get to, that, you know, you kind of do meditation and all this other stuff, and then you get to
Jiffy, your sound went off.
Sorry about that. I have no idea how that happened. But I had this idea that somehow I was going to attain this state and everything was going to be fine, and I wasn't going to be bothered by anything anymore. And I just, going through this chapter, I see where Rupert really kind of brings us to an understanding of this process of washing through the conditioning we have, the habits we have, how we come into this awareness of ourselves. I mean, we can have this glimpse, or we can even sometimes have sustained periods of understanding ourselves as pure awareness. But the gradual sort of colonization, as he puts it, of that can take time. For some people, it can happen instantaneously, but most often it's a process. And I love the invitation to just keep coming back to the fundamental knowing of one's own being in the midst of everything that happens. And, as a therapist, I work with people who have these habituated patterns, who have these learned protective strategies that they've, developed from childhood or after trauma or what have you. And just that, that movement back into awareness, back into being one's own self behind all that conditioning, and being able to weather that conditioning, weather those responses, those reactions that come up. It's just such a gentle, wise, simple way to work with this.
Well, I'm glad you noted that, Jiffy, because in my experience, the many years that that we've been, looking at A Course in Miracles and the non-dual teaching, the most common email comes in asking, how do I stay there? How do I stay in that experience? How do I stay in alignment? How do I have a continuous experience of the peace of God that these teachings point to? And you nailed it, because I mean, that common question causes people, it identifies frustration in people thinking that they're off or they're doing it wrong, or why do I keep slipping back? And Rupert spells out here in this chapter how normal that is. Yeah. And that's what you were just referencing.
Yeah. And I think one thing, there's an unrealistic expectation with doing this work that somehow in doing this, you'll get to a state where you're no longer out of peace. And I sort of put quotes around that, and I'll explain in a moment, that somehow one will attain this peaceful state that is perfectly peaceful all the time. And yes, at a core place, we do have that peace. It's always present. And as we remove our attention from sort of, the external world and our reactivity to things that happen around us, we can always find that place of peace inside. And there's also a very good reason why we have these we have these abilities to become angry. We have these abilities to become protective. We have these abilities to become defensive, because those serve a survival purpose in this world. And yet in the midst of that, when we do this work and we return to that peaceful place again and again and again, we start to come to an understanding of, oh, this is the body-mind's natural protective mechanism. And yet underlying that is this peaceful place. And so then we stop imagining that there's some place where we're not going to have those responses. But what ends up happening is, I found, certainly for me, I started to come into being and recognize, oh, that anger is actually serving a protective purpose. And I can use that response of my body mind to protect myself. But now there's not the sense of self connected with it. So now I'm in awareness. I'm resting as my own, as being. I'm resting as being. And I'm seeing that my body mind is going through what it needs to go through to respond to a situation in a way that is most helpful. And that might include anger, that might include some protection, that might include withdrawing, but it's not coming from a place of, it's not coming from that place of a separate self. And it's not coming from a place of being out of touch with that place inside, that undisturbed place inside. So it's really cool to be able to get to that place where you can see, oh, body mind is doing its thing. Oh my gosh, I just went off into the separate self, but let's see if we can divest of that separate self, but still keep the protective mechanism. And that seems to help me with responding better to things that I do interact with.
Yeah. Wow. Well said. Wow. Okay. So let's look at, the title of this chapter, Establishment in Our True Nature. And this is indicative of the title. Rupert's going to take us through being and staying, as you just described, staying established as the true nature. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know if you want to open up with a selection. I actually on the next page, page 98, the second paragraph down, really struck me as I was reading the beginning of this chapter.
Mm-hmm.
For most of us, the recognition of our true nature takes place in a similar way. Repeated glimpses, followed by gradual establishment, although in rare cases, the first recognition is sufficient and is never again eclipsed by experience. And what he says about something being eclipsed by experience, that sense of, not the sense of, but the knowing, the tasting, the really being grounded in that essential sense of being does get eclipsed by experience. And I was thinking about that word and thinking about how, as we react to something, as opposed to respond to something, as we have these reactions to these habituated reactions, these conditioned reactions, that's the eclipsing, that's the covering over of our being that takes us out of that understanding that we're in touch with that, we're always there, and brings us into that false sense of self that has that reaction, that is like this. Oh, I'm just like this. This is the way I am. No, that's a reaction. Come on back away from that being eclipsed.
Yeah.
So,
yeah, that's, what I also love, Jiffy. Thank you for bringing clarity to that. And I also love, I put a little note on the second paragraph, or the last paragraph on the first page, that lovers meet. That's kind of, he equated it to meeting your partner, meeting a lover, and it's like that. At first, in glimpses, you notice something that felt, it resonated, and it felt like a noticing of something that you saw before. And he gave that cool example of two people meeting, and then it turns into, could be a long-term relationship. And that's, the example is that these glimpses turn into that long-term relationship, back to the self, back to the identification of your essential being. And you fall in love with that because it's so intimate to yourself.
Mm-hmm. That paragraph reminded me of, I don't know if you read the book Eat, Pray, Love, but there's a scene where Elizabeth Gilbert, who this is her spiritual journey, and she's really lost touch with herself, and she's lost a lot of weight and been through a breakup of a marriage, and really had a hard time. And she has an experience where she's walking down a shopping district, sort of marketing district, and she sees somebody in a window, and she sees that person, and she says, "Oh my gosh, I know that person." And there's this feeling in her heart that just she knows this person so intimately, so deeply, and hasn't seen this person in a while, and what joy it brings to her. And then she realizes she's looking at her own reflection. She's seeing herself, and she had lost touch with that essential beauty, that essential being.
Yeah. I've met that woman. Lisa and I met her at a Byron Katie event years ago, and I'm familiar with that book. So yeah, that's awesome. That's so funny. You're looking in the mirror and seeing yourself. Funny. So the idea that is presented on that second page, 98, is that you find yourself. It's like the self-awareness experience is that you are now in touch with that self. And that's why in the beginning of this path, you didn't I know, I'll just speak for myself. It was almost like it was a pull to have a better understanding of what does this mean? And as it becomes clearer and clearer in understanding, it creates a little bit of an excitement of, oh, I want to know more of this.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. And I remember, it was really interesting for me on my journey was that I had a sense that there was some self there that was preferable to the self that I was. And in doing this, I actually had to get rid of this idea that there was a better self and that I was the self, and actually allow myself to just be me and to come into my own self instead of thinking that there was some better self that was going to be waiting for me. Like, now as I even think about that, I think, how crazy was that? Um, and a part of me was sort of disappointed, like, but wait a minute, I'm just going to be myself. But then when you really come into contact with that and settle into that and really get to just be so fully with that, wow, it's just the best. It's the
Yes.
best.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm my own best company. Like, what's better than that? I am my own best company. It's great.
Yes. Yes. There's a comment from Rick on the chat at 12:11 where he said, "We are always, always, always established in our true nature, but not always knowingly." Yeah, thank you for that, Rick. And thank you, Jenny, and for those that are answering questions that people have as we move along. I appreciate that. And what else do we want to look at going forward, Jiffy?
Um, hmm. Oh, on the next page, 99, second
Okay.
paragraph down. And I'm skipping over, a lot here. And if there's anything that you would like to go back to, Bill, by all means, let me know.
Okay.
For some time, it may still seem that we go back and forth between our objective experience, the experience in the outside world, and also just the objects of our experience, and the piece of our essential being. But eventually we develop the ability not only to return to ourself in the background of experience, but to remain there in the midst of experience. And this was such a profound paragraph for me because, there can be this sort of duality of our experience. I'm either lost in experience or boom, I'm there in my knowing of myself and grounded in my being. And that beautiful movement where that duality ceases to be and there becomes that true non-duality of I am an experience and I am being itself. I am experience, the experiencer, and the cessation of there being a division between experience and experiencer, and just being experiencing.
Yes. Yes. That's where the lights come on. And I think that's the meaning of being established.
Mm, yeah.
That would be, I mean, that's only happened for me in the last couple of years. I would say that there really is a sense of being established. And I feel that it's because of, there's a nourishment that comes with the words and the clarity that's pointed to, and it becomes something that's understood and known as
Mhm.
as an experience. It's no longer it's no longer I wonder how things work. It's like that this is true.
That's such a great way of putting it. You don't wonder, and you just know that it's true. You're just sinking back into that simple knowing.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And that's what gives, I mean, I have a great love for these book studies because it's continuously washing the ideas of the pointing it just, I just love doing it. So that's probably, I'm sure that's why I do it. Yeah.
No, it's such a gift to have these book studies and to be able to immerse in these pointers, just, to continually be brought back and to hear it in a different way. And Rupert's just so masterful at always being able to find new, fresh ways to bring us back, to point us back, to enable us to come back and to see that we're already there. We are already that. I remember there was an author, oh my gosh, he's a carpenter in Vermont. And he wrote a book.
David Karse.
David Karse.
Yeah.
And what was the name of his book? Brilliant, Perfect
Brilliant
Stillness.
Stillness.
Brilliant,
Perfect Stillness.
Okay. Those three words in some order.
Stillness. Yeah.
Yep. And that was such a great book. He went to the teacher, and I'm forgetting the name here too, but it was a very well-known teacher who pointed him back to his essential being. And eventually the teacher just simplified it to just be yourself, just be yourself, just be yourself. And David Karse, I remember he really objected to that. He didn't like that the teacher brought it to that. And I think because he was aware that for people who haven't tasted their true being, their self seems to be that separate self. And yet there's such a simple pointing in that essential instruction, just be yourself.
Yeah.
And what someone like Rupert does so brilliantly in this book is helps to take us to that self that is the self that we should just be in order to rest in the peacefulness of our own being.
Yeah. And you know what's funny about that? Just be yourself. It's so simple that we miss it. And it's so subtle that it gets skipped over from the objects of experience, from the content of experience. Mm-hmm. It just gets jumped to and that's because, in the human experience, that's the way we were raised, is to be taught about objects and to name them and to understand them. And so we're divesting our early learning experiences so that you see the more subtle experience that's in the constancy of experience. Yeah.
I love what you say about the conceptual mind, conceptualizing things, naming the objects, and then creating concepts out of them. And we name ourselves, beyond I am Jiffy, I am a psychotherapist, I am now on the show, doing a podcast. And then the sense of identity that comes up with that. But the simple fact of the matter is, when this is over, I'm not going to be that. So I can't be that. I'm obviously not that because I'm not always that. And what I always am, which is the being behind that, is that which I truly am. So that conceptual mind and being able to drop that conceptual mind. And as you said, it's part of our culture to be really just preoccupied with conceptualizations, being able to drop the concepts, being able to drop the labels, being able to drop the names, being able to just experience without the organization, without the conceptualizations.
So looking ahead on this chapter, turning to page 100, is there anything that stood out for you on page 100?
Yeah, I really liked the third paragraph down. Although the belief that we are a temporary, finite, separate self has been uprooted through understanding, old habits have a momentum, which may still cause them to arise, like a boat on the ocean whose engines are turned off, but that carries on, moving for some time. In this case, it will be necessary to trace our way back to ourself again and again until we are stabilized there. And we can have this understanding, this intellectual understanding, and even the experience of pure being. And it can have we can be profoundly affected by it. But oh darn, there are those old habits. And one of the things that I've really appreciated about what I've learned recently through getting my master's and really doing a deep dive into psychology, because there's, good psychology is spiritual, good spirituality is psychological, is the power of our relative bodies, the body mind that we have, the body mind that we operate out of in this manifest world, this material world. There's a wisdom to our body minds. They do serve a purpose for us in this world. And at the same time, our minds, our conceptual minds, like to then create a concept of those body minds and a concept of their purpose and a concept of their reactions, a concept of their habits. And it's those concepts that then give rise to this false self that eclipses our true nature and our own being of our own self. And so again, being able to tease out those concepts, being able to recognize when we're having these responses, and then when we're going into conceptualization, when we're going into having a sense of self and having a sense of creating a sense of self in other, and being able to drop that and just stay with the close experience of what's coming up and how it might be serving us in a protective way or in an informational way. But dropping the story, dropping the concepts, and knowing that, oh, this is the expression, this is the physical expression in this manifest world of my own being interacting within the expression of the material world. And so not having an attachment to that, not attaching a sense of self to it, but just really going into the experience of it, just being able to strip away the concepts of it so that it becomes a pure experience, that's under which is this being. And so I'm not doing a very good job of articulating this, but in which you don't lose sight of that being, and you're still anchored in that sense of being, and recognizing what's coming up without ever having that be veiled.
Yeah. Yes. And, I think you were in the retreat where this happened, Jiffy. And this is really an example of what Rupert is speaking to here, that it's very normal. It's the experience of awakening or enlightenment or being established is very normal. And a lot of people think that the teacher, Rupert, you, me, Rick, Jenny, are some special sage that, they can't really grasp or be where they are. But do you remember that woman that stood up and asked Rupert? She said, she said, I'm not where you are. And do you remember that?
Yes.
And Rupert just stopped her when she said, yeah, I'm not where you are. And he said, well, let me tell you where I am.
Yeah.
I'm hot. I'm hungry. I think I had a mosquito bite on my ankle. And, he just made himself so normal. And that where he is where all of us are. I loved that. That was just so perfect as an example for everyone. You were in there, right? Because
I was.
Yeah.
I was in there, and it was so great. I mean, we all, the whole room erupted in laughter because it was so true, and it burst that whole bubble of that there's this special state that Rupert has attained, and this is the most natural thing. Being oneself is the most natural thing. We actually are very unnatural, and in this culture we're taught to be very unnatural. But no, this is the simplest thing, and we're all already there. And then on top of that is this layer of being unnatural that we've learned. So there's, it's so cliche, but there's nowhere to go. There's nothing to do. This is completely natural to us.
Yeah.
And the effort is the cessation of any effort. But that can be a hard thing to get to, because man, we're taught to effort, we're taught to do.
Yeah. And that's why, Jiffy, I think these conversations are so helpful for people. These just this broad, just authentic conversations about the experience that is, it's subtle, and it's available to everyone. It's no one is excluded, and yet we all have similar experiences before we're established in the understanding. For me, I need the understanding to release the mind from its fixed location, from its fixed identity as a bodysuit. And then it just sort of, I become more open.
Yeah. And I had a very similar path. I needed to really understand conceptually what was happening and what, quote unquote, enlightenment was. I needed to go through that intellectual process so that I could then understand what a predicament I was in, so that I could then start to release myself from that predicament. So what do they say? The thorn, removing the thorn. So yeah,
Right.
and I know for some people that comes through acts of service, being able to just engage in acts of service where the feeling itself of being in connection with others and working for common good with others and getting in touch with that deeper wisdom of what the common good is, that's a path for some people. And for other people, it's the path of movement. It's the path of the body and of pleasure and not pleasure in a hedonistic sense, but pleasure in terms of what's resonating for me in a direction to do and an action to take. So we have these three different ways: the head, the body, the heart, for being able to access this understanding. So yeah, I was like you, through the intellect.
Yeah. Yeah, and so here we are. We're continuing with the intellect, but we're bringing it in through the filter of understanding, and looking on as we continue on this chapter, page 101. I think 100, page 100 pretty much covers the idea that it's okay to go in and out. It's okay that we have our attention on the object or the personal self-experience, because we come back, and it's very normal for all of us to have that experience. And it's also very good to hear others speaking that they have it, because it makes us feel like we're okay.
Yeah, and it also normalizes it. Back when I started this whole thing, I kept hearing, oh, there's just a handful of people who are quote unquote enlightened on the earth. And I thought, well, I don't think that's true. I think this might be a little simpler than everyone's making it. And now people are starting to realize, oh my gosh, this really is the most natural thing in the world. And it's not some achievement. It's the opposite. It's kind of letting go of the whole idea of there being something to achieve. So yeah, it's interesting to see how, because of sharing like this and build the book groups that you have, spreading this and having people say, oh my gosh, okay, hey, you know what? Wow, I just had this experience. I just had this time, this experience of being in the flow, and that kind of fits the criteria. Oh my God, I experienced enlightenment. Yeah, it's really pretty straightforward. It's not a big deal. And it really enables us to normalize being natural, which is self-realization.
Yeah. And also not suffer so much at our own hand.
Can you say more about that? Because
well, I mean, we suffer if you want, like looking at this last paragraph on page 100, Rupert says, as this happens, as we return to ourself, as this happens, peace and happiness begin to pervade our experience from the inside. They not only permeate our thoughts and feelings, but begin to express themselves in our activities and relationships. In time, the body and mind are transformed from the inside by this recognition. So there is a change, although it may not be dramatic. In fact, the mind may not at first realize what is happening and only gradually come to know that it is being transformed. And that it's a gradual, it begins to be your new default experience. And I'm no longer doing the things that I used to do, but it's not by behavior modification. It's just something that has pervaded the body-mind experience is now leading the way.
Yeah, yeah. I remember Rupert telling a story about a woman who just kind of came to realize, oh, she was now there. It wasn't like, oh my gosh, I had this realization, and neither was it an effort on her part, but over time with doing her own practice, which was meditation, and also with just coming into the understanding, she wasn't aware of doing anything, and she wasn't aware of being any different. But at one point she kind of thought, yeah, here it is, here I am. I mean, it was that simple. And I thought that was just so beautiful, because it really speaks to how natural this process is, and how when we allow ourselves to go through this process towards becoming more natural, it doesn't have to be dramatic. It doesn't have to be agonizing. It doesn't have to be some big transformation that all of a sudden happens and, the skies part and the sun comes down and there you are. It can be like, oh, here I am.
Yeah.
One thing I also want to speak for is that the understanding isn't necessary. I mean, this understanding, especially as Rupert has given it to us, is so great at pointing for those of us who resonate with this. But because this is a natural way of being, and because this is a process that is natural and will naturally unfold if it is not stopped by the mind. I was going to say by outside forces, but of course, you could say there are no outside forces, not interrupted. This process will naturally unfold. And so we're creating an intentional space here that helps to facilitate this natural process of becoming our natural essential selves.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, when you said that this understanding isn't necessary, can you say more on that?
Yeah. I'm thinking about my brother's mother-in-law was just, oh my God, she was such a lovely lady. And she had come to understand her true self, not through any practice. She did have a religious faith, but she really resonated with the pure teachings of that faith, with the teachings of love, and with the teachings of selflessness in the purest form. And she just naturally herself just became pure being. And there was such a palpable wisdom and groundedness to her. And you could try to have a conversation with her about the teaching, and it just wasn't going to go anywhere, because, there was no reason for it. There was no interest in it. There was just her just being that. And so we're so lucky that we have these teachings. I know for myself, I needed this teaching to be able to fully engage with the process. But it's really nice also to see people who don't have access to the teaching or aren't interested in the teaching, but that process is a natural process that will do its job when it's given the right conditions.
Yeah. Wow. That was well said. I totally agree that it happens. Why wouldn't it happen? If you're one that is that has a natural state of stillness and presence, why wouldn't what else do you need, right? If you're established as presence and stillness, and I think this is more common in the East, and that's why in the in the community in India and the Hindu and those traditions that um, they have their communities are established to expect what we would call anomalies, but people to just be awake. Just they wake up awake. They come in awake, and or established in something that they don't even have words for. They're just that.
Yeah. This brings to mind something I learned about. Carl Rogers is a very famous psychologist that came up with the humanist approach to psychology, which is not humanist in the there's a humanist movement that sort of replaces religious approach, but this was in a psychological approach. And one thing that he did was these groups where he would create groups where everything was welcome, everything was accepted, and everything was, if someone was in distress or was angry or was reactive in any way, there was an acceptance of that, and there was a welcoming of processing that. And essentially what he did was he created a space that facilitated unwinding and letting go of these unnatural movements that the mind would get into. And these people, these groups of people, after 7 to 10 days would just drop into this place, this pure being where there was just peace, and they knew their true nature. They tasted their true nature, and they were very profound. These groups were very profound. And he created this as well. I actually had as one of my professors someone who'd been his graduate student, and he created this for his graduate students and for the research work that he did. And people who were atheist, people who were religious, people who took on studies about philosophy, and people who didn't take on studies about philosophy, all were brought down to this very natural way of being. Again, because the conditions were right to allow this process to happen. And how nice that is. How nice that is that this is natural to us, and that we have inherent in us this process trying to unfold in this way to bring us into our natural sense of being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And just a comment from Rick on the board at 1239, that noumenal understanding equals happiness, peace, awareness, etc. And then Judy said that I think it's like seeing this world through rose-colored glasses, not saying things don't happen, but having the state in which love is always present. Yeah. And then Jenny Beal said, I think it's more than stillness and living a peaceful life. This would be following the comment I made, I think. It's the direct understanding that there is only one reality, and I am that reality. There are no separate beings, no separate consciousness. Thank you very much, Jenny. Totally right on the target with that. And then Rosalind said, Rupert has recently spoken to a woman asking how to have courage in the face of possible death in the Ukraine. Oh yeah, I saw that video. Most of us saw that YouTube video of her being right there and asking Rupert, what does one do when death, or when we're in the middle of what could be death is? And he referred to all the people who have no conscious understanding, but are available to be courageous and open in the face of all that is happening. Yeah, he just sort of gave a blanket scenario that many people that just they respond with courage, just as something that is a response mechanism that we all have. And one doesn't know where that courage comes from, but with this understanding, we all know where it comes from. It's the response mechanism of movement that just moves.
Yeah, the response mechanism of that one true nature expressing itself in a way that needs to be expressed in that moment, in this construct of time and space. And to be in one's own being isn't to be inactive and in a place of inactivity. It's to be in a place where when activity arises, and it's activity that arises from the movement from that deeper place of what the right action is in the right moment, there's no resisting that. So when we have that impulse to do something that comes from that deeper place, and then we go, well, I'm not sure that's a very good idea. That's our mental construct coming in saying, wait, I could get killed. And then when you're in touch with that, you're in touch with the fact that there's a conflict there. There's an impulse there toward action. And if there's then that counter reactivity of, but that's going to create a conflict and we're going to feel that. And so being natural and being in touch with our natural state, we can notice when those conflicts come up and see what feels most true to me right now. And what feels most true might be action that takes us into a place where we get hurt, might be action that takes us into a place where we get killed. That's what life is calling us to do. That's what life is requiring of us, not as a dictate, but as the natural movement of the whole and of us as a part within that whole in that moment towards a movement that's in connection with the whole and is serving the whole.
Nice. Wow. Well said. Thank you for that. That was awesome. Looking on, we're just about 15. Oh, we have less than 15 minutes left of our time and a couple of pages in this chapter. If you go to page 102, I was looking, I highlighted the second paragraph on 102 where Rupert says, once it becomes clear that our being remains untouched by all experience, irrespective of its content, the activities of seeking and resisting that characterize that the apparently separate self or ego begin to subside. And that really feels like a nice, I mean, I like the way that sounds, but it's also accurately describes one that is established in the understanding is, you could call it a guide. I would call it more closer to an intuition, a knowing, just a movement that occurs naturally because we've become familiar with this new, this self-awareness.
I love the way you say that. I'm thinking about a process I went through of discernment, of starting to explore what is that movement, what's that natural movement that is absent of seeking and resisting, and what is movement where there is seeking and resisting, what's coming from a deeper place, from a deeper movement that's a part of the whole, and what's coming from this sense of a separate self. And that was a that was a period where, I made some really big mistakes. I did some things that were, I think now, oh my God, that's so embarrassing. But I was going through a process of discerning, oh, I think this is, I think this is my deeper self wanting to do this. It's like, oh gosh, that turned out in a way that, oh my God, no, and how humiliating. But going through that process and allowing myself to go through that process, I was experimenting. I was experimenting with, what is this deeper movement? Is it a deeper movement, or is this something that is a construct that I'm creating that's coming from a place that isn't grounded in the whole? And so I invite people to play with that, to be aware of that, to be aware of this intuition or this movement that can spontaneously arise to do something, to act in a certain way, to carry out a certain movement, to respond in a way. And, kind of take note. How did that feel? How did that work? Was that really from that deeper place, or was that something that the mind was coming up as a thing to do because it would, get something or try to avoid something? And that way we come more in touch. We start to get to an even finer level of really moving. What is it? How does that go? To live and move. Oh my gosh, something about in God I live and move and have my being.
Yes.
Living and
Yeah.
moving from within that place, as
Yeah.
opposed to from an artificial place of the mind's creation.
Yes. Yes. And I think that was Joel Goldsmith. And if you take this teaching, the teaching of which Rupert so skillfully points to, awareness, right? I like to take away the God name and say, in awareness, I live and move and have my being. In aware presence, I live and move, and being happens from that place, and it brings it into a direct connection to I am, or to the essence of being that this whole book is pointing to, being myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I do love that Joel Goldsmith phrase and quote, and I've used it often, and it's a good one.
I love everything by Joel Goldsmith. If anyone has not yet encountered Joel Goldsmith, I highly recommend him. He's wonderful.
Oh yeah, yeah, for sure. Well, we have a little bit of time left, and if is there anything that you picked up on the last 2 pages that you would like to highlight?
Yep. 2 paragraphs down on 102 from that one that you just read, which, by the way, I had that marked as well, that one that you read. So I was really tickled. You and I are often on the same page, literally, when things stick out to us. So that's why I love to do these with you.
Thank you.
So 3 down, this does not mean that we no longer feel grief or sorrow. It simply means that we no longer feel the need to defend against them. We are totally open to them, indeed to all experience. And as a result, they lose their afflictive quality.
Yes. They lose they lose the interest. They lose the charge or the addictiveness that we habitually had become conditioned to react with.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that sense of, oh, poor me, or why me? Why is this happening to me? What did I do? Yeah, it just becomes depersonalized, and then we're left with this beautiful ability to just feel the purity of the emotions, like grief and sorrow. Grief and sorrow are beautiful emotions when they don't have that afflictive quality, when we don't have that sense of a separate self who feels guilt, who feels shame, who feels like something shouldn't have happened. And just allow ourselves from that being to experience grief, to experience sorrow, which are pure emotions, that emotion of loss, that emotion of sadness. Then there's such a sweet, such a sweetness to it, because it comes from such a place of love for all of being, and for the experience of loss and of sadness within the context of relationships in this manifest world.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so funny when you're commenting. As soon as you said the word sweetness, someone else on the board said there is a sweetness in all emotions.
See, we're all one mind. Proof.
Right. Yeah, it's really good. There's on the last page, 103, in the second paragraph, Rupert says, a mind that is accustomed to resting frequently in its essence becomes increasingly saturated with peace. When such a mind returns to experience, it does not leave that peace behind. It takes it with itself and its activities of thinking, feeling, sensing, perceiving, acting, and relating become an expression, a communication, and a celebration of that peace.
That's so beautiful. And as you were reading that, Bill, I was thinking about my brother's mother-in-law and how that is exactly what she exuded, was that peace and just that establishment of it. And it was just such a treat to be in her presence because of that.
Nice. Yeah. So, and that's why, we know many people that know nothing about these teachings or, ideas of awakening or enlightenment. And it's like somebody told them something.
How did they get the memo?
Yeah, they sure do act like I want to be. How do they act that way and not know anything?
Yeah, she was such a beautiful teacher. She was such a great teacher. And I volunteered in a medium security prison for men, and I saw acts of enlightenment. I saw these moments where I would go, oh my God, that was the most beautiful thing. That person is enlightened. There they were, dropping into that natural state, being able to get a reprieve from the prison of their mind and the concepts that they had about themselves. And that too is just such an incredible education, to see how we are all that, and it's right there in all of us.
Yeah. All of us, each one of us, each one of you, we, me, I am. Rick left a comment at 12:57 that says, once our true nature is exposed, it is the beginning of the end of me. And I would say it's not true. I wouldn't totally agree with that. I would say it's the end of it leading the way. It's the end of it, or it's the beginning of the end of it being the reaction that is followed. And because it's the glimpses don't seem to just like, okay, you're done, you're cooked. There's a residual factor that is habitual, and it's the conditioned self that we've had many years to practice.
Yeah, and we've all had this glimpse throughout our lives, but when that happens, oftentimes there's not enough of the there's not the mental conceptualizing to be able to capture and identify that. So we've all been natural. We've all had this glimpse per se, but we're not sitting there going, oh my God, I just had a glimpse. It's usually afterwards when we're aware of it, or we say, God, that felt really good, or gee, that went really smoothly, or gosh, that just happened. And without that conceptualization of, oh my gosh, I just experienced enlightenment, or I just experienced a period of peace, it can just go by without our even noticing it. And yeah, one of the things about this pointing is that we then are made aware of it, so that we can then gain the confidence to know that we are capable of that, and that this is available to us. And then that helps to ignite that interest, spark that interest.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we're at the end of our time, and thank you so much for being our co-host today, Jiffy. It has been my joy to see you again and participate in this way. And
My pleasure.
anyone that is interested would like to contact Jiffy, please just write me billfreeonline@gmail.com, and I'll forward your email. And we have 2 chapters left. Next week is chapter 12, Keep the Name I Sacred. And I'm pretty sure it's Rana. It's you, Rana, right? Aren't you up next week, or is it Cindy? Anyway, I think it's Rhonda Marin next week, and we look forward to being with all of you then. And send me an email if you have a preference for one of those books for that short period of time that we'll be waiting for Rupert's book to be available for sale. And we'll see you next week. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Bye-bye. Bye, Jim.